And do you have a statistic for, how much how effective these salmon runs were before all these dams were built and how effective they are now? Is there a statistic on that?
Yeah, so I would say again, it varies by the system, like the river system and the dams on it. But I would say there's been some evidence to suggest that salmon runs in the region have declined broadly by over 90%. And so that compared to historic values, and that again varies by each individual system and things like that. And like if it's a spring run or a fall and winter run and whatnot. But the case is that, or the case to be made is that salmon runs have declined a lot.
For thousands of years, salmon have made an almost impossible journey from the Pacific Ocean up the Columbia and Snake rivers to the icy mountain streams where they were born. But today, that journey has been cut short by dams, and it's threatening their populations. Hello, listeners, and welcome to H2O and Beyond. My name is Alex Hahn, and each week we dive into the science, systems, and stories behind the water we use every day. In today's episode, I'm actually joined by Mr. Ian Giancarlo, who's been a previous guest on the show before. We talked about sea otters and, what they are and what could be done to protect them. And so if you're interested in that, I highly recommend you go check that episode out. But today, he's going to tell us all about what salmon are, what's causing their decline, and what can be done about them. So, welcome to the podcast, Mr. Giancarlo. It's great to have you back on the show.
Yeah, nice to see you again and happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, even though you've been on the show before, could you give us a little rundown of, who you are, what you do, and the place you work at?
Yeah, of course. So again, you know me, my name's Ian Giancarlo. I've been here before. I'm the oceans advocate for an organization called Environment Oregon. We are a statewide grassroots environmental advocacy organization that fights for clean air, clean water, open spaces, wildlife, and a livable climate. And as part of that job, I work to advocate for creatures like sea otters, which we talked about in the last episode I was on. And then also advocate for salmon and southern resident orcas, which rely on them as a source of food, which I think we'll get into a little bit later. So as the oceans advocate, I focus kind of broadly on ocean wildlife, and then I also work to protect actual marine ecosystems in the Pacific Northwest as well, whether that's like rocky coastline or estuaries or things like that.
Awesome. So, since you're in Oregon, let's start off with, what types of salmon live in Oregon? Are there like different species or?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's actually 5 species of salmon that live in Oregon. And a lot of the Pacific Northwest, there's the same similar species. And I actually learned about the 5 types on a trip that I took to Alaska. And they can actually all be named using your hand as a form of memory. So there's chum salmon, which I think of for like thumb. There's king salmon, which I think of as like the middle finger. There's sockeye salmon, which I use as my index finger. Like if you wanted to poke someone in the eye, you would use your index finger. There's your ring finger, which is silver salmon. And then there's finally the 5th species of salmon, which is your pinky or pink salmon. So they can all be memorized by your hand. They all exist in Oregon.
Yeah, it's really cool. And, when we eat salmon, which type of salmon are we usually eating?
Yeah, so it depends. Oftentimes when you buy something, it'll say on the sourcing where it's from. You're on the East Coast, so a lot of that is probably farmed Atlantic salmon. And there's a difference between wild and farmed and stocked salmon as well. But here in the Pacific Northwest, like a delicacy is wild caught king salmon or Chinook salmon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I've tasted both Pacific and Atlantic salmon. I mean, I think I definitely like the Pacific salmon better. I mean, yeah.
That's the general consensus is what I've heard.
Yeah. And I know that salmon migrate thousands of miles, but why do they do this?
Yeah, so salmon are a unique sort of creature in that they are a saltwater species that spawns upriver in freshwater ecosystems. So they kind of, I guess, are freshwater and saltwater species. Whereas adults, they go out and spend their time at sea, and when they're born and when they go back to spawn, they actually spawn upriver in the original spawning grounds that they were actually like birthed in or like spawned in, so to speak. And genetically, they kind of just do that. They've evolved to do that over time because of the safety and security of the specific stream and area where they were born. And then they, as a species, scientists kind of suspect are able to use a combination of like their sense of smell, memory in terms of like visualizations of the way that a waterway looks, and then also the Earth's geomagnetic field to
Hmm.
actually find the exact precise location where they were born. And then to spawn, they will return to those streams to lay their eggs and reproduce.
And are, all five species of salmon, do they all spawn at the same place or?
Uh, like across species, no, like there's not just like one meeting ground for all sorts of salmon, but across each individual species, it's kind of well understood that like they go back individually to their unique spawning grounds. So like as
Yeah.
speaking for an individual fish, they
Oh,
will
I
go
see, I see.
back to where they were born. Is more what I mean. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And are there salmon in the southern Pacific, or are they mostly like a northern Pacific species?
Yeah, there's definitely, I mean, they go down in like speaking for the most part for North America, uh they're in Alaska, Canada, throughout the western United States, and then they kind of, I believe, stop somewhere around the like mid to central California, as
Hmm.
far south as Southern California, but like for the most part on the West Coast, it's like primarily a Pacific
I
Northwest,
see.
Canada and Alaska thing, but there are some in California as well.
Yeah, and for the salmon that live in Oregon, can you describe the migration route that they actually take?
Yeah, so it depends a little bit on the species, or not the species, but like the individual animals as we were
Hmm.
referring to before. But the largest river system in the Pacific Northwest, or at least in Oregon, is the Columbia River Basin. And that waterway leads to a whole host of other smaller waterways that kind of funnel into it. So it's like river systems, uh, the mouth of the river or like the main waterway is like the low point of a watershed, and then all these other river systems flow into it, and then
Hmm.
collectively they eventually flow into the ocean. So when I'm referring to the Columbia River Basin, it's the Columbia River and then all the tributaries of it. One of those tributaries that we like to talk about at Environment Oregon is the Snake River, which is a very large subbasin within the Columbia River Basin that has long been identified as having pristine spawning grounds for all sorts of salmon species. But it's not like all encompassing. There are a bunch of other waterways within the Pacific Northwest and in Oregon and in Washington and all these other places where salmon can go upriver and spawn. And then where the actual terminus of those waterways is kind of dependent on each individual river system and the basins that they're a part of.
Okay, I see. So most salmon start spawning in the Columbia River Basin, from my understanding, right?
No, I don't want to necessarily say most, but I
Hmm.
would say that that is a very prominent like basin within the
Okay.
region. Um, the actual details and the numbers I don't know off the top of my head, but I would say it's very prominent. Just to say the least.
And what are some other basins that salmon like to spawn in, for example?
Yeah, so you may have heard this on the news. I don't know if it's gotten a lot of traction on the East Coast, but there was actually a successful dam removal project on the Klamath River, which was on the border of California and Oregon. And that would be like another basin is like the Klamath River Basin. So that's in southern Oregon. And there's been a lot of success around salmon returning to that river after some dams were breached, and I'd be happy to talk about that a little later. I think that'll just come up
Yeah.
in our conversation.
Cool. And what happens, like, what actually happens once the salmon reach their spawning point?
Yeah, so they're kind of like nature's endurance athlete in a lot of ways. I think it's very interesting how like impressive salmon are as a species. So as an adult, they are in the ocean, and then they are kind of I don't know a better way to say it, but like they're called back uh to their spawning grounds through like an intrinsic or inherent knowledge that they need to go and reproduce. And they basically swim. It depends again on the terminus of the river that they were spawned in, but sometimes thousands of miles upriver. So they're gaining altitude, oftentimes swimming against the current, all the while uh, sort of wasting away to the point where when they actually reach um, their end point, they don't last that long in that ecosystem, and shortly after they reproduce, they die, and then that's like the end of their life cycle is usually where they spawned or close to where they spawned if they make it.
And how long until a salmon is born until when it's ready to, head back from the Pacific to the place they spawned?
Yeah, so the adult lifetime of salmon, I think varies a little bit. I don't know the exact numbers off the top of my head. And I guess it varies a ton by, well, it doesn't vary a ton, but it varies by the species specifically. And like again, I don't know the specific number
Hmm.
because there's just so much variation. But I believe I could be wrong, but I believe it's a couple years
Yeah.
before they go back.
And is this what, people refer to as a salmon run? Is that the route that people go from that salmon go from the Pacific to their spawning point? Is that the salmon run?
Yeah, so a salmon run is basically just when, like, in the olden days and in some river systems today, it literally looks like it's just a stream of salmon.
Uh-huh.
Like it's so in like you may have seen photos of this, but it's like so abundant with salmon that it literally just looks like a river flowing with fish, and you don't actually see a ton of water. And that's kind of where that term originated from. Is it's like almost like a stampede on land. If you imagine like bison or wildebeest or other things, there's
Yeah.
just so many that it's really all encompassing.
Is it that time of year again when salmon are about to start doing these runs or?
Yeah. So the interesting thing is there's also, even among each individual species, there's also different seasons of salmon. So
Mhm.
there's like, for example, for Chinook salmon or king salmon, there are spring runs and fall, like there's spring summer runs, and then there's fall winter runs. And that's kind of true for other species as well. Primarily it's spring and summer and fall and winter. And like, so to answer your question, like, yeah, like now is a time, not for all of them, but for a certain species or a certain group, yes.
Oh, so when you mentioned like the spring, was it spring, summer, and fall, winter? Were those the combinations?
Mhm.
So like one species of salmon only spawns in like the spring and the summer, and then the other ones fall in winter.
They're like subgroups within a species. So like, for example, like I just talked about Chinook salmon,
Hmm.
there is a, like in river systems, there could be a spring summer run of Chinook. Let's just say for the Snake River, there could be a spring summer run of Chinook salmon, and then for the Snake River, and then also for the Snake River, there could be a fall winter Chinook salmon run. Does that
Oh,
make
okay,
sense?
yeah, yeah, yeah. So like over the course of a year, different like members of the same species can go and spawn in, right?
Correct.
All right.
Yep.
And, and what factors like influence the success of a salmon run?
Yeah. So I would say one of the biggest things is like how accessible is the river in terms of them being able to actually make it
Mhm.
to where they're trying to go. That's a big thing. That's probably one of the most prominent things. Another huge issue is water quality, generally, which can also be impaired by things that are in the way, like dams, which we can talk about a little bit more later. Um, so water quality, passageways, is the other main thing. I'd say broadly, climate change is a big factor that kind of influences everything as well. Um, Predators,
Mhm.
are another big factor. Um, for example, here, in the Columbia, sort of closer to the ocean in the Columbia River, there is a dam, and marine mammals like seals and sea lions have actually swam upriver to this dam because they found that salmon kind of like to pool on the bottom, and then
Mhm.
um
They just
they
eat
will
them.
attack the salmon and
Yeah.
eat it as a source of food because it's easy for them to do so, and they're intelligent, and they figured out that this is like a great way for them to sustain themselves.
Yeah.
That's not to say that this is a huge problem, but it is something that is a concern for some people. It's not a main focus of our campaign or the things that Environment Oregon is focused on, but it does happen.
So I mean, is it physically possible for salmon to like jump up these dams, or it's just impossible, right?
It depends on the dam. There are some that are frankly just fish cannot swim through them or around them. But some have been designed where fish can actually swim or make their way through, but it's an incredibly stressful event for them. So even if they do make it through, um, like that's not the mark that we should be shooting for, right? It's like
Yeah.
it's clear that whether or not they can make it through, that these are negatively impacting these fish. And for certain dams under certain circumstances, like those in the Lower Snake River, for our case and the things that we work on, we think there's an argument for removing them because the net negative for fish or for salmon and just migratory fish is really a problem.
And do you know the exact mechanism for like how these salmon can make it through there? Because I'm trying to like imagine myself. I can't really see the salmon like getting through like from the lower water levels to the higher ones. Do you know the mechanism?
Yeah, so dams are in I guess the simplest way to there are multiple different ways for salmon to get through dams. And I would say that the easiest way to think about it, just for listeners or for people so people that are listening understand, is like dams are not just like a wall. There's underwater, or in some places even above water. It's more or less hollow
Okay.
in some places where fish or other things can get through. Um, and I'll say that the time of year, the water level, overall, if there's a lot of sediment in the waterways, those can all impact those things. But dams are not just immovable walls in many cases. There are small holes and things for things to get through. And then in other instances, there are things like fish ladders, or salmon ladders, as they're sometimes called, which are not the greatest solution to removing the barriers that fish have in terms of dams. But essentially, it's like a mechanized way for fish to be transported up and down a river around a dam, but it's not as effective as I think the inventors thought it would be.
And so like yeah, that's exactly what you guys at Environment Oregon have been doing. But like I mean, I know y'all have like a bunch of dams along the Snake River, and yeah, can you walk us through what's happening over there?
Yeah. So if you're a salmon making your way through the Columbia Basin, and let's just say your spawning grounds were in the Snake River, which again is a sub basin within the broader Columbia River Basin, you would be swimming through the Columbia River and have a series of dams to get through, and then eventually, you would hit the junction of the Snake River and the Columbia River, and then after that point, there's in total in that area where the rivers meet, there's around eight dams in total, four actually on the Columbia, and then four on the Lower Snake River. And some of them, of those eight, are very difficult for salmon to get over, if not impassable at all. And then the four on the Lower Snake River are passable, meaning that fish can get through them. But the way that they have been designed, and as they exist now, they really impair and inhibit water quality, which makes the like ability, like it basically inhibits the salmon's ability to have a successful migration upriver. And the issue with that in particular is that, as I talked about or mentioned very early in the episode, was that the Snake River has long been pointed to as like one of the most pristine spawning grounds for salmon in terms of its viability in the future, as existing habitat. With the effects of climate change, other river systems are actually at risk of just kind of withering away or really being damaged in terms of water quality, to the point where salmon won't be able to spawn there at all. And so there's like a long-term argument to be made for like making the Snake River and the headwaters of the Snake River as accessible as possible to really help salmon in the region, because broadly salmon runs in the Pacific Northwest have really declined over the years,
Mhm.
largely because of dams and impaired water quality as a result of that. And then also the challenge of actually getting over certain dams. So there's just like a lot of challenges in the way for these salmon, which already, even if rivers were free flowing everywhere, the trek itself is very arduous, and it's not a guarantee. Like the return rate is incredibly low overall in terms of salmon making it out to the ocean, and then the overall number that make it back anyway, even if rivers were free flowing.
Mhm.
So that's just a big concern overall.
And do you have a statistic for, how much how effective these salmon runs were before all these dams were built and how effective they are now? Is there a statistic on that?
Yeah, so I would say again, it varies by the system, like the river system and the dams on it. But I would say there's been some evidence to suggest that salmon runs in the region have declined broadly by over 90%.
Oh,
And so that compared to historic values, and that again varies by each individual system and things like that. And like if it's a spring run or a fall and winter run and whatnot. But the case is that, or the case to be made is that salmon runs have declined a lot.
and does this make salmon an endangered species right now, or?
Yeah, there are, I believe it's 12 or 13 species of salmon on the Endangered Species
Mhm.
Act that are listed as threatened or endangered. It might be a little more. That number could be a little outdated, but it was a little over a dozen species of salmon were threatened or endangered.
And is the reason for like since these dams have declined the salmon population, is this why we're resorting to like salmon farms nowadays?
Yeah, so fisheries in salmon, or excuse me, salmon hatcheries have been implemented kind of as a result of all of this to kind of supplement the overall number of salmon returning to river systems that have
Hmm.
been negatively impacted by dams. But it's not really a long-term solution. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that farmed salmon actually can lower or like lessen the quality of the gene pool for wild salmon. So oftentimes it's like almost like a poison pill where like if they are um mixing with wild salmon, it could actually make that their populations over time um less hardy, so to speak, and make them more susceptible to the threats that we've already put in their way. And then really also just taking a step back, thinking about it, like we know that one of the best solutions to restoring wild salmon would be to just breach these dams.
Hmm.
And the fact that we're having conversations about supplementing wild fish populations with, man-made or not man-made ones, but ones raised in hatcheries, to me, I think is, um, it's it's a difficult thing
Yeah.
to consider.
And I've read an article from you guys published by Environment Oregon. You guys talk about the resident orca population, how they rely on the salmon. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so southern resident orcas are a unique subspecies of orca or killer whale that exist and live primarily in and around Puget Sound in Washington. But they have been known to go outside of the sound and then go as far north as southern Alaska and then as far south as central California. And to date, there's only around 75 individuals within that subgroup of southern resident or of orcas. And the thing that makes them really unique to other orca species is that or orca groups is that they exist primarily, almost solely, really, on a diet of Chinook salmon. And like as we've talked about, salmon runs in the region have declined dramatically over the years, and in particular, Chinook salmon populations have been especially hard hit in declines. As a result of that, if there's the species of southern resident orcas that really needs Chinook salmon to survive. If the salmon are withering away, the orcas are going to wither away. And that's just been a huge challenge for them. Essentially, they're starving to death, and humans are watching in plain sight. Basically, Puget Sound is a very well inhabited area in and around Seattle and Washington. And they're really a beloved creature in that region. And with so many eyes on it, it's just a really tough situation. When we know again that one of the simplest ways or one of the best ways that we can restore wild salmon populations to help southern residents would be to breach dams on the lower Snake River.
How many of these orcas have actually like died, or is there like a statistic for how hard hit these orcas have been as a result of these declined salmon runs?
Yeah, so their population has more or less hovered around 75 individuals for decades. Like it's gone up and like it's basically been like less than 100 to around 70 for like the past
Mhm.
50 years or so, or as far back as we've been recording. But as you can imagine, with a population that small to begin with, any fluctuation really to any degree is really alarming. And the fact that they're not increasing in number is also really alarming. The thing that I like to point out a lot is that infant mortality for southern resident orcas, meaning like if a mother gives birth to a calf, how likely is that calf to survive? I think that's a really good indicator for long-term population sustainability and health.
Mhm.
Um, right now, that's around 50%, which is pretty bad. So that means like one of every two babies born
Yeah.
dies shortly after birth. Like that, the infant mortality is defined as like recently after birth. How likely is it to survive? Um, and the fact that that's so low, um, it's really kind of heart-wrenching because being a Pacific Northwesterner and living here, anytime a southern resident orca calf is born, it makes like news headlines like crazy. Everybody sees it on the news, everybody's talking about it. And then oftentimes, unfortunately, like in this year, anecdotally, I think I've written 3 articles about a calf being born, and then shortly a couple days after writing another update that it just passed away or it's disappeared and we haven't seen it, so it's likely passed away. And that kind of seesawing of emotions is really challenging, I think, for people, and it kind of tugs at people's heartstrings in a good way that makes them want to take action.
Yeah, and is it because these resident orcas are starving because they don't have the Chinook salmon to feed on?
Yeah, that's certainly one of the primary challenges, I would say, is that um, they're starving, and the lack of food makes them more susceptible to other stressors, like water pollution is a big factor. Um, Vessel noise and traffic is another concern, which also impairs their ability to hunt. Which we talk. One thing that we haven't talked about yet is salmon have increased, or excuse me, decreased in number kind of broadly in the region. But the other thing that's also changed dramatically is their size.
Ooh.
So not only are there fewer salmon, but often the salmon that southern resident orcas are catching are actually far smaller than they used to be. So calorically, it's a lot less like calories per fish that they're consuming. So it's kind of like it's doubly bad because not only are
Yeah.
there fewer fish, but the
Now
fish are
they have to
smaller,
eat
and so
more,
really
right?
they need to catch
Yeah.
more fish when there's fewer around. So it's just like a kind of a snowballing situation where, if we don't do anything soon, we really risk losing these species, and the fact, or like southern resident orcas in particular, and um, the fact that people are watching it so plainly is really tough for people to swallow, I think.
Yeah, and can these orcas like not switch to another species of salmon to eat, say? Does it have to be Chinook salmon?
They do eat a couple other varieties of fish, but not like they, for whatever reason, prioritize Chinook salmon. They like again, they do eat a couple others here and there, but I would say the vast majority, in terms of percentage of their diet, comes from Chinook salmon.
Mhm. Yeah, and say like magically all these dams got torn down. How long until we see, the results of the salmon population come back to life again?
I think it depends. There are a lot of factors that would affect that,
Mhm.
but I think a good case study for this is the Klamath Dam removal, which I talked about a little bit earlier, which again is on the border with the Klamath River is on the border of California and Oregon. And it's a kind of a similar situation to the Snake River Dam issue in Oregon and Washington. Excuse me. And those dams were breached just a couple of years ago.
Mhm.
And a lot of the projections, in terms of number of salmon returning by this point, have already been blown out of the water. The region has seen an increase above the projections, in salmon returning and then making it back to the ocean, which is really exciting and kind of
Yeah.
a positive positive indicator for dam removals in the future. So we really are trying to kind of spotlight the Klamath Dam removal as a success story and to show that, if we are really having conversations about trying to save salmon and southern resident orcas, which is a focus of our campaign, And we're seeing success stories from just a couple hundred miles south. It's really a positive light or it's like helps build our argument for more to be done to actually help these salmon and southern residents.
Yeah, and how are your efforts going right now in terms of, advocating for this dam removal? How's it going?
Yeah, so a lot of our focus right now is on public education. So just getting people to understand the broader problems and have conversations like this. Um, to get because again, the biggest problem right now is not a ton of people know about this issue. And then for action to actually happen, it would need to be like dam removal is a federal process, and it would need to go through the federal government. And currently, with the current administration, that's just a bit challenging right
Yeah.
now. They are not in favor of removing the Snake River dams right now. So our focus is again on educating the people and the citizens of the region so that they understand and feel compelled enough to actually want to see change. And that's really been our focus for some time now.
And to, tear down these dams, is it done by like, a vote of the local residents that then, gets pushed out to the federal government or?
Yeah, so to actually remove the dams, it would require an act of Congress. So folks in Washington, D.C. would need to vote on it. But it would also involve tribes in the region, local stakeholders, the Army Corps of Engineers, the governments of Oregon and Washington as well. It's like a multifaceted process to actually remove these dams if there were an avenue to do so in the future.
I see. And, salmon are cold water creatures, and our planet has been warming recently. How does climate change affect these salmon?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I would say the biggest thing is actually in their migrations kind of upriver. Like I've mentioned before, even if the fish or salmon can make it through dams, oftentimes on the back end of these dams, it's impaired water quality. And that's because by design, dams are meant to slow the flow of water.
Mm-hmm.
And when it's summertime or there's just warmer temperatures than normal and the water has slowed down, it can heat up. And salmon are cold water fish, and they're highly susceptible to even a slight increase in temperature changes. So what we've seen is that on the back end of these dams, the temperatures are much higher than salmon are used to, and that creates like a lethal scenario. And then on top of that, warmer water breeds a host of other organisms that can really degrade the water quality. And that makes it even more hazardous for these fish. And so it's kind of like a domino effect where we're just seeing these ecosystem imbalances where salmon are just not equipped like biologically to deal with these things. And frankly, they shouldn't have to. But that just creates a whole host of challenges. The other thing that climate change also impacts in mountainous regions where salmon are trying to have to swim upriver is a lot of these waterways that they kind of swim into are fed by snowmelt. And that, as you can imagine, with climate change can vary substantially year to year. And it makes predicting the quality of salmon runs and their actual ability to make it upriver very seasonal. That just it's adding a lot of uncertainty into the mix, and is more or less hurting the situation.
Yeah, but the big problem is mostly the dams, right?
Yeah, I would say that the dams are the biggest problem, and they also compound the issues that climate change are causing. Climate change can cause.
All right. And I want to talk about something fun, which is I heard you guys recently had your run for salmon run. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so I'm a distance runner. I love to run. And I had this great idea to combine my love of running with salmon and activism and advocacy by creating this run for salmon runs, which was this event where I organized folks in the Pacific Northwest to basically pledge to traverse 14 miles over the course of 1 week. And that 14 miles would basically represent 1/10 the amount of river that is blocked by the Snake River dams. So those 4 dams basically block 140 miles of river. And over the course of that week, on top of traversing those 14 miles, folks completed a series of like actions in terms of like signing our petitions, calling on our elected officials to do more to save southern resident orcas and salmon, and then completed a variety of other actions that were all aimed at getting our government and elected officials to do more for these two animals that are really at risk. And then on top of that, like I said, I'm a runner, and so I organize 7 community runs across Portland, where I'm based. And I, over the course of the week, covered the full 140-mile distance, which was a lot of fun with those 7 community runs, which is really cool. But all in all, I think collectively, everybody that was involved traversed a little over 700 miles, which is the equivalent of running from Portland, Oregon to Yosemite National Park, or for folks on the East Coast, just loosely off the top of my head, is about running from, I believe it's like Boston to Atlanta, I think would be about what 700 miles is. I may be wrong, but I'm from New England.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to remember the East Coast mileages off the top of my head. But yeah, it was a long way.
Would you call this Run for Salmon run a success?
Yeah, I would say so. It was definitely a fun way getting different people involved that maybe are a little bit outside of the folks that I normally organize and work with. It's always fun to combine two things that you're really passionate about. And for me, that's environmental activism and then running. So that was definitely a really fun experience. And I hope to do stuff like that again.
Are you planning any more events right now regarding salmon, or just anything in general?
Yeah, some things are in the earlier stages, but I don't have anything that I think I can share yet.
Yeah.
But there's a couple other things in the works for sure.
Yeah, we'll be looking forward to those.
Yeah.
And what gives you hope regarding the future of salmon?
Yeah, so I would say seeing the Klamath Dam removal and how that's gone and how receptive people have been in the region just overall to that issue, which was also very politically heated, as is this one, certainly gives me hope in the sense that it's still continuing to get media coverage and people seem really invested in making sure that the success of that river system is highlighted. So like from a people standpoint, that gives me hope, seeing that and how that went and how that's still going and will continue to go. And then from like an actual like ecological standpoint, also with the Klamath Dam removal, seeing how quickly salmon have bounced back in that area and are already exceeding projections really excites me, and kind of is a testament to like the fact that if you leave nature alone, nature will come back, so to speak. And that I think is something that's really exciting, and gives me hope broadly for salmon and for orcas, and then hopefully for the Snake River.
Yeah, and I don't think we talked about this, but what are the arguments to be made against the dam removal? Why are people against this dam removal?
Yeah, so there are a variety of reasons, and I think it kind of boils down into 4 different issue areas, and I'm just going to generalize here because it could be like each one could be its own episode. But one is an energy concern, which these are energy producing dams, and statistically they do not produce enough energy for us to believe that they're not worth removing, but some folks have an energy concern. Another is a transportation concern. Obviously, dams change the flow of rivers and river ecosystems. And if society has developed, these dams were installed decades ago, like a very long time ago. And the societies that have evolved around them have basically evolved with those dams in place. And as a result, the people in those areas are somewhat opposed to change and fear how that may impact the transportation on the river. There's a recreation concern, which is kind of similar to how, again, dams alter ecosystems. And so if you're changing the river ecosystem by removing the dams, that could change the way that people recreate in that area. And then finally, there's also an irrigation concern. So that area of Eastern Oregon in Eastern Washington is an agricultural area, and they need irrigation, and they have a concern that if the dams are breached, that it may negatively impact irrigation. All of which, from our organizational standpoint and from a lot of the research, we believe that those concerns could be mitigated or reduced to the point where, again, dam removal is still the best course of action to save salmon and consequently southern resident orcas. But those are the main concerns that people have is all around change.
Yeah. And, as we sort of wrap up this episode, are there any last words you'd like to say to our listeners?
No, I don't think so. I think I kind of tried to holistically present the issue overall. I guess with that, I guess I do kind of have one is like I try to generalize a lot because a lot of these things can be boiled down to a very specific instance in a very specific scenario. And when speaking generally about things, there's like I'm trying to balance vagueness with specificity,
Yeah.
for the sake of listeners, and I would recommend that if people want more specific or like numbered information, that they check out our website or one of our partners. We're part of a broader coalition of groups in the Pacific Northwest that all focus on salmon and orca recovery, and we have more specific information on the actual like statistics and data around a lot of this stuff.
See. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Giancarlo, for being a guest again on H2O and Beyond. It's a pleasure having you.
Yeah, of course. Happy to be on again. Thank you for having me.
If you found this episode helpful, please share it with your coworkers and friends. And if you want to be a guest on the podcast or have any episode suggestions, there'll be a Google form linked down in the description. And like Mr. Giancarlo said, a lot of the information in today's episode was a bit generalized, and so if you want more specific information, I definitely recommend going to check out Environment Oregon's website, which I'll link in the description below. And make sure to check out our link tree, which has all of our socials, and so you can stay tuned with what's happening at H2O and Beyond. There's going to be a special episode coming out, actually, on December 2nd, I believe, where I'm actually being interviewed by B&W Insights, another environmental engineering podcast. So yeah, stay on the lookout for that. I'm Alex. Thank you for listening to H2O and Beyond. Stay curious and stay hydrated.